All right, we are back. We are COMP125. That's client-side web development. One of you guys grab the door. In the summer 2018 semester at Centennial, we're week 5, part 1 of our broadcast, and today we're going to be talking about working with the DOM. But before that, let's talk about some administrative updates. One, your assignment 1 was due on Friday. Most of you handed it in. Some people asked for extensions. Guys, I'm going to allow it this time around, but please don't ask me for extensions on the day that is due, right? Some of you said, like, it's Friday and I want an extension. Please, I have a problem, blah, 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 whatever. That's the wrong time to ask. That's like, imagine if in the real world you're working and then you're not going to finish, and you know you're not going to finish. You'd know that like on Wednesday, right? You'd know that on Tuesday. You probably know that you're not going to finish, right? So you want to give your client a heads up. So to me, okay, fine, I'm a professor, and maybe I'll take it this time. I'll tell you, other professors would not, right? They'll give you a 0, or they'll give you minus 20% every day, or whatever it is. So I'll accept it this time around for this first assignment. But for the second assignment, please do not ask for extensions. There's not going to be any extensions offered because of all the other work that's going to be coming down the pipe. I cannot do it, right? And if I give you guys extensions, that means marking is delayed because I got to mark everyone at the same time and all that kind of stuff. And that's why I'm going to accept extensions for this time, and I'm going to mark everything by tomorrow. So let you guys know that after tomorrow, whatever it is, okay? So that's the first thing. Second administrative thing is, remember that we're sitting at week 5 and your first test is week 7. That's 2 weeks away, right? So, it's coming up. In terms of format, typically in the past, what I've done is I've done it on one day, usually on the second day. So it'll be most likely done on the Wednesday, right? I'm going to start promptly. I will not allow anyone to come in 15 minutes past the start of class. So if you're late, you will not be able to write your exam. Just letting you know, right? It will be on the Wednesday of that week. So remember, we meet on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Tuesdays we meet at 12:30. Wednesdays we meet at 10:30. So it'll be at 10:30 on Wednesday, 2 weeks from now, right? So that's when it'll start. It'll start promptly. It'll be a 2-hour in-class assignment. That's what you'll be given. That'll be your exam. You'll do your assignment within the time frame allotted, and then you're done. There will be no extensions if you can't finish it off during that time frame, unless you otherwise have some kind of special reason for it or an accommodation. You'll have to finish it within a 2-hour time frame, which means you need to practice if you haven't had a chance to do it already. And then, I'm going to give you a working project. So I'm going to give you something you've probably seen before, that we've been working with to build you up. I'm just letting you know in advance. I'm going to give you a template, and then from there, you're going to modify that template to make it work the way I want you to. That's it. So you won't have to create a project from scratch. Yeah. Open book. My exams are over open book, because at the end of the day, it's open book, because if you don't know, nothing will help you. Doesn't matter how much you Google, right? It doesn't matter. If you don't know, that means you don't know what to Google either, right? So it's not going to help, right? So yeah, open book, open internet. The only thing you can't do on my exams is you can't watch my videos. That would be bad, right? Because otherwise, this doesn't make any sense. But other than that, you can use whatever resources you want. You can use your notes. You can use whatever. You can even use your code from GitHub and all that kind of stuff if you need to. Again, it may not help you. Speaking of GitHub, this week was announced, or just last week on the weekend was announced, that Microsoft has purchased GitHub, or in the process of purchasing GitHub, for $7.4 billion in shares, which is interesting. GitHub has been the largest open source, provider of open source code for a long time. And it hasn't been very profitable at all. And Microsoft, and they haven't had a CEO as well. If you read about it, they have no CEO. Microsoft has stepped in there and bought GitHub, or in the process of buying GitHub, as long as it gets approved, for $7.4 billion in shares, US, right? So they're not actually transacting any kind of money. It's very interesting, a new thing. Also this week, just an announcements for tech, if you're interested in tech. The WWDC for Apple, that's Worldwide Development Conference, is happening right now. It's starting Monday. It did this whole announcement about Apple products and all that kind of stuff. And it's going until Friday, I think, or Thursday. Really interesting stuff. They talked about the new version of macOS Mojave, and a bunch of other stuff that's going to come up. How is it affecting you? Well, it's not related to this course necessarily, but it is a tech thing that you guys should be aware of, even if you're not Mac users. You guys should know about it. It's something that's happening. And you should keep up to date with current tech events that are happening. The next gaming thing is happening, right? E3 is going to happen, I think it's next week, right? Starting off. So that's another thing for games. All kinds of announcements have come out if you're a gamer. Things about Bethesda announcing, Fallout 76, and a bunch of other stuff happening. So you should take a look at that. If you're interested in games and tech, this is the time. June is usually the month that all kinds of stuff happen. And then in September, there's going to be more stuff because usually it's June and September for Apple and for other companies. So that's it for news. I met with some of you on last week just to look at your assignment number ones and give you some critique. For the most part, it was okay. None of you are artists that I've seen so far, right? Which is okay. I'm not expecting you guys to be artists, right, at all. Although there's going to be I'm going to be looking at it when I mark your stuff. I will be looking at a user interface component, how the graphics look. Does it look appealing or not? There will be a mark around that because if it's really ugly but functional, you'll lose some marks. Just letting you know, right? So because we've been talking about Bootstrap this whole semester so far with me, then my expectation is that you'd be using Bootstrap. Some of you decided not to. That's fine. But you need to use some kind of CSS to make your stuff look good. And I'm recommending Bootstrap to make it easy. And besides, most new frameworks, they start with Bootstrap. So it's good to get to know it because you're going to see it all over the place. So that's it for administrative stuff. Today is going to be a different kind of lecture because we're going to do a couple things. One, we're talking about the document object model. And, this is week 5. This is right out of the book. Again, book's okay. I don't think it's a bad book. There's some things in there that I would skip and do different times. One thing that I would, kind of look, ahead is about, creating constructor objects or objects. And you guys are learning object-oriented programming right now in COMP125, if I'm not wrong. You guys talked about classes and objects so far? So you understand the idea of classes and objects? That's good because we're going to we need to understand that in order to talk about this word object, right? Because that's what we're going to be talking about today, document object model. And the reason why it's different today is because I'm going to look at some of the slides because there's a couple good slides that I want to focus in on because of diagrams. Okay, so let's talk about the first thing. So again, this is right from the book. So what we want to do is we want to hook into, now it says access, but really we're getting references to elements on the page, right? ID, tag name, whatever. We want to hook into those elements somehow. And there's different ways to do that. And this is what this class is all about, this class and tomorrow's class, which is kind of one of the most important classes throughout the entire semester, because if you don't know how to do this stuff, then, well, we did a little bit of it already for assignment 1, and you're going to do more for assignment 2, because we're also going to do some form validation next week, right? That's what's happening next week. By the way, I've also put up all the lecture slides as per a couple of people's request, even though you should already have the book or should have access to the book. I put them up on eCentennial, so you have all those. All the PDFs for this this semester are up. You can look ahead if you really want to. It's just the raw PDF from the book, so there's not any of my stuff. I'll be adding other things like I normally do every week. Okay, so this is what this class is about, and the idea of adding and removing nodes. What the heck is a node? And we want to be able to create and close browser tabs in Windows. We'll learn how to do that today and tomorrow. And there's some additional things. For example, this idea of a set timeout and set interval functions. Yes. You can't see that for some reason. Yes. Let me see. Well, I am recording, which is a good thing. Let's see if that works. That should adjust my screen too. And you should be able to see what I'm talking about in a second. Thank you for that. Yes. So we're talking about, going back, we're talking about the document object model. We're talking about how to hook into objects. Thank you about that. And then we're looking at the set timeout and the set interval functions and what those things are and other objects, because the document object model is part of, this thing called the BOM. So what's the difference between the DOM and the BOM? You should be able to answer that today. Yes, but what does that mean? Right. So we'll talk about that in a second. Right. Let's take a look. The whole thing. Yeah, the whole window. So let's take a look at that. So again, use the history, location, navigation, and screen objects. There's a bunch of other objects. And again, when I say objects, then you should know object-oriented programming will be good. Can you grab that? Okay. Object-oriented programming, right? So when we say object, it's something that's been created, for us that we can use. An object or a class that we can reference. That's what we're doing with web pages in JavaScript, right? Okay, so let me skip through here a little bit. So again, like we said, browser, object model, the BOM, and it also says or client-side object model. Two ways of thinking about this. And then we have this window object that comes from the BOM. Okay, but if you look at this diagram, this kind of explains it a little bit better, right? So this is the BOM, this whole thing. The window object is the upper hierarchy, or the upper node, the root node of the BOM, if you will, right? And it comes with the history object, the location. So these are all classes. Think about it this way, right? And you have different objects or different classes that are part of this class, right? So this is the Windows class, right? If you want to talk about classical kind of structures and if relating to something like C#. And by the way, it's not like C#, because C# uses classical inheritance and classical, object-oriented programming. And in JavaScript, we use something called prototype-based programming, right? Which is still object-oriented, but it's not classical, right? It's not not a class-based, it's using prototypes. And we'll talk about that later. There is an inheritance concept, but really it's more of a, using another prototype. And so that's what it works out. We'll talk about that later. So again, window, you get your history, location, navigator, screen. These are all objects available through the window. The other one that's missing here is the console, right? The console object is part of the window, right? So that's the other thing that we have to talk about. So these are, and there's a bunch of other ones. If you go window dot, it'll come up. If you use the dot accessor for the window, it'll show you a bunch of different objects that you can access through the window object, right? And that's how it works. And some of them are top level. For example, if I put in the word history, I don't have to put window.history. And same thing with location. I don't have to put window.location. I just have to put location, right? So to know when I start using those things, when I start using history or location or navigator or screen or document, we don't need to go window.document, okay? So just FYI, that's how it works. So again, the document refers to the web page itself. And usually we manipulate the DOM, the document object model, a lot with JavaScript, right? But we can do the same thing with the screen. We can get information about the screen. We can information about the navigator, kind of thing. We'll talk about what these things are and the location and so on. We can get information and modify some of the stuff, especially history, which is something we need if we're going to create our own JavaScript-based routing, which I want to get to by this course. So I want to kind of create our own routing. I want to be able to use one single page application to, kind of drive everything, which is more of a modern way of doing things. So instead of having multiple pages, I'll have one main page and a bunch of partial objects that I'll inject into the page, similar to what we do with other popular, front-end libraries like React.js, which is a very popular front-end library. We'll inject HTML and JavaScript into the page later on with Ajax, okay? But that's later on. But before we get there, we need to know about this. Without knowing about this, the rest will be very hard to know. And we use some of it already in assignment 1 and some of the things we've been talking about, but we haven't explained it. I haven't really gone through it at all. So that's what I'm going to be doing today and tomorrow. So again, dynamic HTML, wow, what an old term. I don't really use dynamic HTML ever anymore. Because it's kind of an older term. Everything should be really dynamic. When you think about dynamic, it's really something I'm doing with the web page with JavaScript. Typically, that's what dynamic HTML means. I'm kind of modifying my HTML, and I'm manipulating the DOM. I'm navigating the DOM, if you will, using JavaScript. Okay, and here's some examples. I've got the DOM hierarchy, and you can see that I've got a typical page. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger, actually, for you guys. There we go. Here's typical page, and you can see that there is something that we've seen before, right? This is the top level page, HTML, the head of the document, the body, the header, and the article and all this other stuff. And these are, right? So we say, tags. Tags are also elements. There's a difference between a tag name and element name. We'll talk about that later. But really, if you think about this head tag, it's one part of the head element. What are the other parts? So the difference between a tag and an element, what's the difference? Because you guys should have learned this in HTML 101, right? When you guys took that course. And I see some faces like, I don't understand what the difference is. I thought they were the same thing, Tom. They're not the same thing. So an element is made up of a tag, right? The starting tag and the end tag. But there's also stuff in the middle. That's the element. The whole element is the starting tag and the end tag plus its contents. Okay? Yes. It could be nested elements. It could be text. It could be whatever, right? So that's here as an example. You can see that the head element has two tags, head and /head, right? /head is, this idea of opening and closing elements when we mark up the document. And inside of there, you can have other objects. Now, I want to talk about this because normally we ignore the head, right? But actually, the head is part of the document. And there is quiet CSS going on, right? That actually hides the head. But we can actually show the head if you really want to. We never need to because it's really a control element, if you will. But we could if we wanted to. So again, this hierarchy kind of looks like this. You've got the document, and this is, again, I like this diagram that they came, comes right out of the book. I think it's a good one. Here's the document, right? In the document, you've got your HTML element. Inside the HTML element, you've got two other elements. You've got the head element and the body element. Notice that there are two different nodes. Each of these is considered, quote unquote, a node, right? And document is the root node. HTML is a child node of the parent root node document. I'm using different terminology, but you guys should all know about this already since you guys took HTML and you guys are all HTML experts right now, right? You know about you're laughing at me, but it's true. You should all know the document object model. When you take an HTML, they should explain that to you, but it's okay. Even if they didn't.
We're really good at web expression.
Yay.
That's what we're good at.
Shh, we're recording. Document and HTML, and we got head and body. These are nodes, right? If you think about this, and there's this parent-child relationship, right? So every element is a node, and every element could be a parent and or a child. Okay, so let's think about this. So HTML is the child node of the document object, right? Head is a child node of the HTML element, right? But it's a sibling of the body element. Sibling, same level, parent, child, right? These are children. This is the parent. But this is also, the head is also the parent of both the all meta nodes, as well as the title node or element, right? And you can see that the tile is the child of the head, which is its parent. And also, head is a child of the HTML document, but it's also the parent of the title object. Okay, to understand this parent-child relationship, right? So you can see if I want to go and see into the head, I can go down into the head, just like I was, I'd be looking at let's say, a path. If I looked at this as a directory structure, right, or a folder structure, that might be an easier way of thinking about it, or a container structure. People look at it that way at all. The document contains the HTML element. The HTML contains everything, right, because it contains both the head and body elements, right? These two objects, nodes.
Any editor that can display the structure?
Not really, and you shouldn't really. You should think about it you should understand it more than anything else. But if you look at it here, I think maybe there might be some other editors out there that used to do that. Maybe in some older editors, they used to do that kind of stuff, but not anymore. So you can see that there's a head and there's meta tags. There's more than one meta tag, and there's a title, which is only one title typically for each object, each document, right? And then you have some other child nodes. The child node of the title is this photo gallery, and you can see that they've kind of broken it up here, right? Text, remember this is text content. This text content is contained in, we can say that it's contained in the title node or element, okay? Meanwhile, this one here, this, kind of this other color here is an attribute. And attributes would be things like character set. Char set is an attribute of this meta node or meta element, right? Just like if I go on the body side, I go body, and then inside the body, I've got a header and some kind of article. So I'm just looking at this particular thing as an example. That's why we're just breaking this down here, okay? So if you look at the header, you can see that it has an H1 element. And inside the H1 element, you have this garden photo text content. This is a node, a child node of the H1 node, okay, which is the parent. This is the parent, child, parent, child, parent, child, siblings. Okay, so when I talk about siblings, I mean they're on the same level, okay? When I talk about children, that means they're on the lower level than the parent, okay? This is just terminology, so we're all clear. Because we need to do this, we need to search the DOM in order for me to do this properly, right? All right, and then we have, on the other side, we have this article container or node or element. Call it whatever you like, for whatever makes you happy. And then inside there, you have a figure, right? Article has a figure. Inside the figure, you have a fig caption, as well as an image node, right? Now look at this. So here we go. Here's your figure, which is it's basically a node that's inside of an article, right? The article inside the body's inside the HTML object, right? And if I want to find a fig caption, it has butterfly bush, which is the text content. Butterfly bush is the text content of fig caption, right? And then we have the image, right? We have this image node with an attribute. This is what you guys are talking about. The attribute of SRC. SRC is the source, that's what it stands for, which has some kind of string value, right, of where the image is getting its, this is what the source of the image is, the JPEG file that the image is accessing. And there's also another attribute called alt. Alt is alternate text that gives you, for screen readers and for other things that aren't able to see the image, you can actually, display this. And if you look at it from accessibility perspective, it doesn't show that, but the image has two attributes here, right? So attributes are part of the whole element. Remember, the element's made up of the tags, attributes inside of the element, plus the content inside of that particular tag, inside the tag, right? So that's why their elements are different than tags. Tags are only one part of it, and so attributes are also one part of the element. Are we good with this? If you're not good with this, the next part going forward, the next part of this semester, you're going to be lost. Yeah.
Normally, instead of art, we use title.
Say that again.
Title. The attribute title.
The attribute.
Displays actually.
So the attribute. Sorry. Say that again. One more time. Yes.
So you have two attributes, source and art.
Yeah.
So instead of art, we are using title.
Title.
Display some text.
Yes, you could use a bunch of stuff. You can use text, title. You can use. There's a bunch of attributes. You can have many, many attributes. In this example, though, you don't see a title, right? It's just if the image has two attributes, source in this case, and alt. And that's why we're just using this as an example to create this DOM tree. All right. So this DOM tree is based on this previous figure. Okay, that's what it's based on. But yes, you could have additional attributes. Sorry?
Art doesn't seem to.
It does, just for different reasons. It's not for what you're looking at, right? The alt is usually for alt text, just in case, again, for screen readers and that kind of stuff. And you also should use role. Role being from an accessibility perspective, it gives screen readers an idea of what this element is for, right? And you should have learned that again in your HTML 101. For an accessibility perspective, we have accessibility add-ons, attributes that we use, right? Like, for example, role is an attribute, and we can assign a role for each of the objects. All right, so that's the DOM tree. We have element, attribute, and text content nodes, different kinds of nodes, right? But those are the most common. And we have ways of accessing them. And we've already, kind of explored this GetElementByID. And what it says, it returns the element with the ID value ID that's inside this capital, right? So when it says returns, I want you to take that with a grain of salt. What it's actually doing is it returns a reference, right? That's what it does. And that's why when I say, let's hook into something, I mean, let's get a reference to the object that's inside the document, right? And we're doing that by GetElementByID. And this returns one object, right? Because it's GetElement. I can also do GetElements. And some people were surprised or confused by this, but this returns multiple elements. Okay, multiple elements. Okay. So that means you're getting kind of like an array-like structure. It's not an array, but it's array-like. Okay, it's array-like. And it talks about that in JavaScript. Some people are confused. They think it's an array, but it's not. And it gives you some other things that it's missing. You can convert it to an array. We can talk about that later on.
So what about the page class is the class, one class, but they repeatedly used on the same page. So how are you going to do address on this?
Okay, so if I have, are you saying if I have more than one class?
No, if you one class, but they use different.
Yeah, you can do this. So you're getting a reference to each of the elements that are kind of use that class. You're getting an array of elements. Same name, but you're getting an array of elements, a bunch of references. Basically, what you're doing, right? So if I use, let's say, for example, going back to this, and if I had in my header, as an example, and this is kind of a weird example, but let's say I had the same class that was in my header and this fig caption, then the header and the fig caption would be captured if I use GetElementByElements by class name. If they use the same class, then both the header in my example, right, and the fig caption, if that makes sense, would both be captured in that array, right?
So we have to specify the word class
No,
inside.
no, just the class name, whatever the class name is, right? So inside, okay. So if I have a class equals to whatever inside my element, right? The class attribute inside an element, you can have an ID attribute, you can have a class attribute. An ID attribute is unique for that particular element. It's only for that element. You're only supposed to use it once. Otherwise, it won't adhere to W3C rules. Okay, that's why it works. It won't validate properly the document itself. You're only supposed to use an ID once, but you can use a class many times. And don't think about it as a class as in it's a class like a C# class. This is just a way of tagging multiple elements on a page, so I can attach the same style to each of those elements, similar to what Bootstrap does for us.
So you mean it corresponds to the CSS?
Yes,
class.
it's a CSS class.
So even if we find an empty class, specify associated with element, so then we can.
If you create a class attribute, it doesn't matter if it's being used by, there's no empty class. If you specify a class attribute for your element, and then whether you use CSS on it or not, you can still hook into it with JavaScript. Okay.
Without specifying the CSS.
Well, you have to specify a class name, whether CSS is attaching to it or not. Okay. All right. So get elements by name. That's a different thing. That's using the name attribute, right? Get elements by tag name. So all elements with a tag of H1. That's as an example would be the tag name for all elements. Now these two, there's two of these, and this is where I get a little finicky with this kind of stuff, right? Why the heck do we need jQuery? That's my question, right? We used to need it, but not anymore. Not with this. With Query Selector All and Query Selector, really it takes away a lot of the need of jQuery. jQuery makes it easier, and we're going to learn jQuery later on. We'll touch upon it really, really briefly. But you won't need it if you want to use something called vanilla JavaScript. So vanilla JavaScript doesn't mean like it's a brand of JavaScript called vanilla. It's not like that, right? It means bare bones JavaScript. When you hear the term, hey, do you know how to do stuff with vanilla JavaScript? It means, can you do it without any other library? That's what it means. Vanilla means like, hey, I'm not adding anything to it. Okay, I'm not coloring it to look like chocolate, right? It's going to just be vanilla. It's the JavaScript that's out of the box, right? So because I have this Query Selector and Query Selector All, this returns a collection. Notice it says collection, collection, collection. That means like it's an array-like structure that comes back to you. Or that's what these are, an array-like structure. Okay. Title. Yeah, it doesn't say that here, but notice it doesn't say get element by title because there isn't anything like that, right?
How do we
class name and name. Name is a name attribute. Class name has class equals to, and then the name of the class. All right.
So let's see your others are asking. The two more than all. So we want to select it by get element by title.
Mm-mm.
No.
You can't. Yeah, that's why you have to switch and make sure that it's you're looking at the right document, right? So if I'm looking at the about.html page, right, there might be something on the about.html page that doesn't exist on the contact page, and vice versa, right? So you want to switch somehow and detect which page you're on. And the easiest way to do that is by assigning, the document title, right? That's just the easiest way. That's what we've been doing. But there's many other ways you can do it. You can actually add, this is weird, an attribute to the body tag, whatever attribute you want, by the way. Like, for example, name. Name is equal to about, right? And I can look at the body tag, because the body tag, going back up to here, is an element. It's part of the element, the body element, right? And the body element can also have attributes. So I can create an ID for the entire page, if you will, right? And then I can switch that way too, right? So if the ID of the body tag is contact, then I can switch that way. You can decide. I'm just using title, right? But you can choose whatever way you want to switch. No, we have to specify the name. And let me continue, and you'll see. All right, so then here's some properties. We have the document's body elements, right? So this is properties of the document, all right? And this is interesting because this is all part of the document. For example, the document.body refers to the body element. So you don't have to go document.GetElementByID or .elementByTagName body. You don't have to do that. You can just say document.body, right? Document.cookie. We'll talk about, you should kind of know about cookies, but if you don't know, it's okay. It's a cookie object that we, kind of keep in the document, and we can store stuff in there, like who you are, and I can track you. Actually, Apple just made, just as a reference, Apple just made this new announcement that they're going to make the Safari browser so it's the do not track, which is kind of interesting. They're looking at that to protect your privacy, which is interesting. All right.
Body is also HTML.
Body is an HTML element, yes, but it's also part. You can actually reference it from the document. So because it's so commonly referenced, document.body, right? I can do that. Cookie, domain, last modified. So when the document was last changed. The location, which is interesting, location of the current document, including its URL. So we can get that. The referrer, okay, which is the URL of the document that provided a link to the current document. Why would I need that? Because I know I can track who's referring links to me, who's clicking on another link that comes to my document. That's kind of interesting from a tracking perspective. These are all things I can use to track. Document.title we know about. Document.url, the URL of the current document. In our case, localhost is the URL because we're using a local server, right? But you can get all kinds of stuff, information about the user. We're going to be talking about that today. All right, so we talked about GetElementByID. I'm going to skip this one. We talked about how to do that, and we've done this over and over again, this idea where the ID attribute is zip, the type is number for the input, and then I can get a hook. I can hook into this zip. I kind of basically what I'm doing is when I get anything, this idea of get, the word get is I'm actually querying the document. I'm searching through the entire document and I'm going, hey, give me the first case where I hit the zip, an element with a value of zip. Give me that reference to that first element like that, right? And that's what this does. And then it returns a reference to this particular object right here, this input object. It returns a reference, right? And it stores the reference inside zip field. That's what it does. That's when I say hook. What you're actually doing is zip field now represents a connection to the HTML document, right? Into the element that contains the ID of zip. Okay, that's what it does. Okay, so again, only one because GetElement is a good hint that it's only returning one object. Okay. GetElementsByTagName returns a array. It says array, but actually it's not really an array. It's a collection of elements right? That's what it really does. And it's array-like. Okay, it's array-like. It returns this collection of elements, right? And of all elements by tag name. And the tag name is the name of the tag that you're trying to search for. For example, H1. Give me all H1 elements on the page. Give me all P elements on the page, paragraph elements. Give me all whatever element you want. Okay? If there's more than one, this is a good use, right? So I don't have to look for ID or class. I don't have to inject ID or class into my code. And sometimes we used to use this if I inherited, kind of a page from somebody else, and they said, please don't change anything in the page. Okay? I don't have to change anything in the page. I can still hook into items in the page by tag name if I wanted to, if it made sense. Here's an example of that. So I'm looking for an H1 element, but notice that I'm going to get a number of them. And this is interesting. We're going to talk about chaining, event chaining, and object chaining, which is what happens in JavaScript, which we've never talked about yet. But if you notice, it says document.getElementsByTagName. So up to here, this is the array, not including the square brackets. This returns an anonymous array object. That's what this does. And then I want to get the first or the 1th element. That's a better way of saying it. Not the 0th. The 0th element would be the first element. The 1 is the 1th element, which means it's the second element, right? So it's going to get the second element of the array, right? So this is the second H1 tag that I'm hooking into, and I'm referring this. I'm getting the value of this, the reference to this, because this is going to return GetElementByTagName is going to return an array of references. An array of references to different H1 tags, okay? I only want the second one, not the first one, right? So that's why it says second H1.
Sometimes it goes the attribute value.
The value is the actual value itself, but this wouldn't work here because the value is just a reference. And you don't have, H1 doesn't have a value, it has an array of values. So it would get some kind of weird undefined, right? JavaScript, unfortunately, will not complain, which is a problem. I wish it would complain more, right? All right, here you go. Here's get elements by class name. This is going with what you said, Riaz. Look, so I'm looking for this class name called side. Well, there is no class name called side in my example, but you can see that I'm getting all elements, and this is how you should read this. Give me all elements that match, that have a match. I match all elements that have this side class, an attribute with a class that's a class attribute that has a value of side. All elements, and it returns an array-like structure, a collection, a node list. Think about whatever you like of all elements that match these values.
So you need to specify class is equal to.
No. So as an example of that would be so class attribute takes multiple values. So you can say I can have more than one class. So side and green. Notice that I can put a space, side and green, if there was something like that. So if I had an element that said something like, here, let's just type it out. So imagine if I had, I can't do that. Imagine if I had a tag, right? So I had a paragraph tag like this. I'll type it up, right? And then in my paragraph tag, so paragraph tag usually closes like this, yeah? And there might be some stuff in here, right? And then, there's the attribute class. Class equals to, if it was just side, right? Then it would just, be like, it would be, kind of only the first one, the first case, which is this. It would hit. But I'm looking for all elements, right, that have both side class and the green class, right? See what it says here? It says class attribute takes multiple values so that this method takes multiple arguments. Arguments enclosed in a single set of quotes with the class name separated by spaces is what you're looking for. So that means that I'm looking for something like green. 2 classes, side and green. And that's why I'm looking at that. So you can actually put that in there, all right? If it was something like that, okay? Yeah, 2 class names. An example would be Bootstrap. Bootstrap has multiple classes. Nav, navbar, right? 2 classes. 2 different things that nav and navbar do. Nav, background BG-dark. That's a class in Bootstrap, right? Dark background. All right.
This class has nothing to do with CSS.
It has everything to do with the CSS class has, but we don't care about it, whether the CSS is defined or not. All we care about is that there's a tag with an attribute of whatever of class, and the class has a value. That's all we care about. We don't care if CSS doesn't have anything to do with it. All we care about is that inside the tag, there's a class attribute that has an equal sign and something that's in the equal signs. That's all we care about. Okay? If it has somehow kind of connection to CSS, great. If it doesn't, who cares? We don't care. JavaScript doesn't care about CSS. JavaScript will make its own CSS. It uses CSS, but it'll use all the elements in the configured elements on the page. All right, get elements by name. By name, right? So color is a good example, right? So the name attribute is what we're looking at here. So let's see if they give you another example. They probably don't. But here's an example of, no, this is not it. This is query selector. So in this case, if we were going to have an element by name, then it would look like this. It would say, so let's say, for example, we had a, so I'll put this open here. I'll do this right in the PDF, in the document. So let's say I had another paragraph tag, right, with a name attribute, and I made that color, right? Then that paragraph tag would match elements with the name of color, right? Name is actually an attribute. You can name stuff. And usually names are for things inside of a form, because the name is actually the ID of your variable in the form that you're going to save later on. Okay, that's what the name attribute is. There's
both
ID and name is very important for forms because name captures the value of inside the input. All right, and usually whatever that name element is what we want to capture here inside of our code. All right, yes, I'll do all those things. All right, so query selector. Now this is one of the most useful selectors we can use. A query, so all the things we've been talking about actually are selectors. Each one of them is a way of selecting a tag or an element on the page. That's what it does, right? Query selector uses CSS syntax, which is interesting. This is why I like query selector the most, right? It's query selector and query selector all. Query selector returns the first occurrence of something that matches your CSS syntax. For example, a header that has an H1 tag in it that has an image, right? Well, how do we read this thing? Let's go back. How do you actually read that? Oh, how to have elements? No, up here. Yeah. How do I actually read this thing? What's the proper way to read this thing from a CSS perspective? You guys know?
Yeah, the header and the HI are nested.
It's the other way around. The way you're supposed to read it is an image that's inside of an H1 tag that's inside of a header. That's what it's supposed to be. It's the other way. It's actually backwards. You got to add JavaScript, yeah, in assignment 2, absolutely, yeah, right. So image and H1. Take a look at your assignment 2 requirements. Okay, so I'm actually targeting the image attribute. That's what I'm targeting. The image element is what I'm targeting. I'm saying, hey, show me the image that's inside of an H1 element, right? That's also inside of a header element. There's only one image like that, right? In this case, this one, and that's what I'm hooking into. Right? So query selector is really powerful because it actually targets a specific thing based on CSS selector syntax, right? And because it's query selector and not query selector all, it returns the first occurrence. There could be multiple occurrences. All we care about is the first one. Now, curiously, query selector first occurrence actually returns an array, an element. It's elements, right? More than one element. And be careful about that. It's kind of a weird thing.
Just the first occurrence.
So query selector.
Say there is some ID, so we need to put hash sign. Here there's a class.
This is all exactly all the regular CSS ways of selecting. All right, so here's an example of query selector all. This returns a collection of elements, different than the query selector. Query selector. Guys, please, I'm hearing you loud and clear. It's like an echo in here, right? If you want to talk, just go outside the class and talk and then come back, right? All right, so yeah, so here's a nav element, and I'm looking for all elements, all list items, this is how I would read it, that are inside UL, unordered list, that are inside nav elements. That means all of these match, right? Because each one of these list items are inside of UL, and each one of these list items are inside of a nav. So this matches all three of these. So I returned 3 objects, this one, and this one, these 3, okay? That's where it's important to understand what you're getting when you do this query, whatever it is. And these are all queries. These things that we've been doing to kind of access the DOM, they're all queries, right? Text content we've talked about. It used to be, remember we talked about inner text? Not good. And there's also something called inner HTML. And we know what inner HTML does. It actually gives the inner HTML of an object. But both the text, if you think about it, is both inner HTML and text content, is it not? Because it's inside of an object. It could be that the text itself is the only HTML we have. So be careful, because once you mark something as inner HTML, you mark it as an HTML object, not a text content object, right? So this, just keep that in mind. So example would be, if I look at the about us as an example, if I'm looking in there, that is the text content of the anchor tag that's inside of a list item that's inside of a UL, right? And notice the way it searched it here. It says, hey, this object, link 1, is equal to, we're using query selector all to return a list of objects that match a list item with a class name of top nav. That means all these, right? And I only care about the 0th element. That means only this one, right? That's all I care about. That's the 0th element of this one, right? And so what that means is, if I look at the 0th element, right, I'm getting a link to this list item. Now the list item has, right, an anchor tag inside of it. And if I say link 1 HTML content is equal to link 1.inner HTML, this is actually going to point to the anchor tag that's inside of the anchor element, this A element, that's inside of the list item element, this one, right? And that's what it tells you here, right? And it says the link 1 just text is equal to link 1.text content, and it says about us, because link 1 is the list item, and the only text content that exists inside this list item is about us. This is HTML, this anchor tag. Okay, just so you know the difference between one way or on the other. Typically, I don't like doing this. Typically, what I like to do is, hey, I want to get the anchor tag, and the anchor tag's text content is what I like to do, because I don't want to make assumptions. But this is perfectly fine. Okay, so that's the text content. I'm not going to talk about IE8. I don't care about IE8 right now, right? So again, CSS properties, I can use the style. Notice again how this works. I'm getting an anonymous object back, right? Document.GetElementByID logo. So the ID, any object with an ID of logo. I want to access the style, the CSS of that logo. I want to change the display to none, which means I'm going to hide that element. So display is the style I'm modifying, the CSS style that I'm modifying, okay? And I'm changing the value right here like this, okay? That's what it does. Again, this is a great example of object chaining. My first object is the document. Inside the document, we're querying an object, an element inside the document, right? It must be a child element of the document, must be, okay? And which is going to be this element that matches the logo ID, right? And then we're using method chaining to look at style. Style is a class or an object that exists inside the element ID. And then we're changing the display property of the style object to none. That's what we're doing. So just the way you read this thing. And I know I'm taking my time, and you're like, Tom, I understand. Some of you do, and some of you kind of do. Some of you don't. right? So, and I got to say this again and again. You're going to hear me say that, and then you're going to get confused, and that's why I'm going slow. Again, font, I want to get a reference to the font. So I'm saying document.getElementByID logo. I want to get the CSS value of my font family and return it and store it inside font.
So
Okay.
you're just accessing the
Font family, the current font family that's been created or defined, and I'm storing it inside my font. Okay. Keep going here. Here's my color. I can also set. One is getting, and I can also set with the same way. So if I make this equal, then what I'm actually doing is I'm setting it to none, right? But if I don't have these things, I'm actually getting the color. Give me the color of this object, whatever it is. We're going to go there in a second. Okay. I don't want to go through this whole thing, but here's something else. GetElementByID. I'm going to get my home link, and I'm looking for the href attribute. The href attribute. Well, here's a problem. What if the element that I'm getting back is not a link? It's something else. Does it have an href attribute? And what is it going to return? It's going to return undefined because maybe it doesn't exist, right? Notice there's nothing that I'm actually doing with it. I'm not saying, hey, var or let some variable is equal to document.getElementByID, blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying, hey, I want to access this element, and I can do that directly by using this chaining, kind of methodology, right? Okay, I don't think I'm going to go further than this right now because I want to give more of an example. So let's get back to this. So again, I'm going to start off. Lesson 4 is what we kind of used before. And I want to kind of make a copy of this. I'm going to kind of copy lesson 4 and making lesson 5. I'm going to put this up because we're going to use lesson 5 throughout this session, today and tomorrow, right? So let's put this together. Lesson 5. 5A. Maybe we'll have 5B. I don't know. That's why I'm calling it 5A. And I'm going to kind of use Visual Studio Code here for a second because, we can do all this stuff watching the PowerPoint the whole time. I'm really not a PowerPoint reader too much, but I wanted to go through some of that stuff because some of you will have questions, and I just wanted to explain that. All right. So again, just like we did last time, for completeness only, I'm changing this value to 5 and this one to 5. And I'm going to set up a GitHub repo that kind of matches this thing. So I'm keeping everything else in here. One thing I'm also got to do is remember that this has a built-in Git repository because I copied it. And it's the exact same Git. I'm just going to erase it. So I'm going to kind of right-click and delete. So I don't want it pointed to the same Git repository that's on GitHub right now, right? I want to make a new one. So again, if I go here, I can look at my command prompt. Here, I'm going to say git init, like we did before, right? Git add dots, git commits -m, initial commit. Which does all the preliminary work we need. And then what we need to do is connect it to a GitHub repo, which is what we're using is GitHub for version control. And then if you look at GitHub, I'm going to go to Centennial College because that's the stuff we're doing. I'm going to make a new repository, right? And we're going to say, again, it's COMP125. It's correct. And summer 2018. And it's lesson 5A. Press enter. We're going to accept the basics. And you can see that I'm just going to grab these last 2 lines of code here, copy them, go back here, and right-click and paste. And now we've connected our object to our repo to the repo in GitHub. It's very straightforward. So now we've got a new repository, a new lesson, and we want to make some adjustments. Before we continue, though, one of you said, last time, they're like, Tom, can you add some regions in here? There's a lot of code in here, right? It's a lot of crazy code, and I can't follow along. It's too much. And I said, no, I'm not going to make regions because I wanted something else. And this is the moment that I've been waiting for, because for the first time ever, we're going to split our file. People get confused about this, right? Because they're like, whoa, okay, how do I split my file? What do I got going on right now? And let me explain what I got. So far, up until today, we've got this let app equal to function blah, blah, blah. Okay? Let's rearrange some of this. So instead of let app equal to function, and if you notice what I'm doing here way at the bottom, I'm saying, well, I want to access my app, right? And I want to return stuff. What if I didn't do it this way? What if I did something like this? Let app, right? Which it creates a variable name called app. What if I pass my app into this anonymous function? Hey, this is new, right? Let's just talk about what it is. So I pass my app in there. Yay! Okay, can I do that? Yeah, because it's a function, right? Even though this is an immediately invoked function expression, I've been using something called an anonymous function. But what if I use iffy in here? Can I do that? I'm just making it up, right? I can make my function called Tom, right? That's okay too. The named function now, that's triggering automatically. So whether I put this, Tom, or nothing, it still works. It's still a function. In this case, it's just anonymous, no name, right? And I'm passing a value, this empty variable called app, right? Okay, now I have a container that's from the global namespace up here. This is the global namespace. And now I'm going into this iffy namespace down in here, and I'm passing this variable inside of here. Okay, is it possible? Yes. And then way down here, right, instead of returning this document.title, right, we could do this for sure. But what if we talked about returning stuff? What if I said that, well, got to take this app and I can attach stuff to the app, right? I can attach stuff to the app. Like, I don't know, I want to return the title. Well, I can always do it like this. If I want to return the title, I can say that, well, app.title. And you're like, wait a minute, there is no app.title. There's no title attribute to the app. You're right. As soon as I assign it, I create it in JavaScript. I can say that that's equal to document.title, right? And what I'm actually saying here is app, which is this, which is being passed into the function. I'm assigning a property called title, which doesn't exist yet. And I'm making the value of that property document.title. I'm accessing the document object, getting the title from the document, and assigning it to this new property called title. But it's landlocked. It's not coming back out. It went in to my function, but nothing came back out. And typically we would use a return. But because it's an iffy, we have a special case. What we can do is we can go down here and these brackets, and this is new. I'm just telling you it's new. So keep in mind this new syntax, right? What we can do is we can say app, I want to return app out, right? Or, okay, this is new syntax. Please bear with me. Or app is just going to be an object for us. Okay, so what the heck is this? Why is this that way? Why is this object? What I've actually created is something called a namespace or module. Now, app itself has additional stuff. It has this property called title, right? And now I'm assuming I've created an object called app, which has all this stuff inside of it, right? But I'm only returning out anything that I attach to it. So here's my returns. So these are all my apps. These are all app properties, right? Think about object-oriented programming, my object, right? I'm creating properties on the fly with JavaScript. That's how you make them, unfortunately. You don't say var title is equal to blah, blah, blah. You don't do that in objects in JavaScript. You just say app.title is equal to something. And then all of a sudden, boom, title is created. I made it uppercase, but you can call it Tom if you want to, right? This is just my name. So if I want to make it app.tom, right, then it'll be Tom, right? This is my identifier. So I'm calling it title with an uppercase, just because. All right, cool. So let's see what I got here. Let's run this thing. So I'm going to go into, again, I want to open in command prompt, right? and I want to do a light dash server. What do I get when I do this kind of stuff, right? And I come to this, I got my nice colored app because we're kind of continuing from last week. And if I right click and I do inspect, and if I go to my console, you can see that, right? Everything's okay. But what if here at this level, I press the, kind of put app and then press enter. It tells me that the title property that I created is this. I can also do something like this. I can say app dot my funky long name is equal to something weird, right? And press enter. Then I can say app enter. And now I have two properties. I have my funky long name as well as title. So by assigning it, that's how JavaScript works. Again, we're way ahead of the game here. We're talking about something that's object-oriented kind of stuff. Object-oriented stuff happens in the second half of semester. I'm talking about it now, right? Because we need to. If you don't understand this, when you access the DOM, you're like, what the heck is going on, right? Anything I want. Anything I want by just assigning it, okay? An example of this, let's take this even further, okay? So document.title is one thing, but what if I said something like this, app dot, I don't know, I want to have my first element. So if you look at the element that's on my page, right? I look at, I want to search for an element that matches the class of navbar. Okay, my first element that matches the class of navbar, all right? And inside of that, or let's go even further, I want to get this brand. I want to get the navbar brand, all right, this one. So navbar-brand, right? I want to get this element, this anchor tag, right? And I want to get the inner HTML of this anchor tag. Okay, so I want to really get this. Okay, that's what I really want. Okay? Well, it doesn't matter which one, right? It doesn't matter which one. They're all the same, right? So they're all, in this particular case, the navbar brand is all the same logo. Okay, so whether about or whether they're this, they're all the same navbar. I just copied it over and over again. That's what I've done. Okay, so notice it's the exact same one. So I want to kind of get this one, and I want to return that out, right? I can do that, right, by going back into my code and saying something like this: my app dot brand image, making this up, okay? I'm making it up, is equal to document dot query selector, and I want to look at navbar dash brand, right? So that's my query selector return one. And then dot, and if you notice that I want to get my inner HTML of this object, right? So I said navbar brand is the only one I want, right? Is there more than one? Well, if you look at, let's take a look here. If I go back to my app.js, right? And if I go into my index, I'm saying, hey, go and get a query. I want to query the document, and I want to get this class of navbar-brand. That's where I'm looking, class of navbar brand, right? But I need to put a dot in front of it because I'm looking for a class of navbar brand because my query selector is exactly like CSS syntax. So if I go back to my query selector syntax, this is not correct. It's got to be like this, navbar brand, right? Because that's what it would be from my CSS to select that, right? So if I say save, app.brand image is equal to navbar brand. I'm getting the actual nav, and inside the nav object, right, is inside the anchor tag, I'm getting this image source. That's the inner HTML node of my anchor tag. Okay, no error. If I go app, now I have this. I have my title here and my brand image, which is image source assets. That's the image. Look, that's the inner HTML, right? And that's what brand image is equal to now. And notice there's some spacing in the front and there's some spacing in the back because it's HTML. That's what I'm getting. I'm getting HTML. Okay, what else can I do here? So if I can do that, So I'm getting the inner HTML. What else can I do? If I go dot something, dot, I can get the ID. I can check to see if it's connected. I can look at the last child. What about first child? That's also an option. So if I go first child, right? Notice that first child is a node, right? And the first child of my anchor tag is the image tag. Now I'm actually getting the image tag, a reference to the image tag. Well, you can do that. First child, last child. You can look at those things, right? So if I do that, and if I go back to here and I put app, because I'm returning app out, you can see now that I'm getting, if I kind of hover over this, I'm getting, what's my brand? It says text, right? Brand image is text. And if I look inside here, all of a sudden I go, boom. And it's actually a reference to the image, right? That's what this thing is. And it tells me that my image, right, is, first of all, this is the base URI. Here's a child list. There's no image. So it gives me a bunch of stuff. Here's my next element sibling, right? There's the image element, right? And you can see that I'm getting logo 3. Well, it's not exactly what I wanted, is it? Because I'm getting the next child node. Next child node, right? So I'm actually saying this. I'm going, let's take a look at what I've done. I've gone to here. This is my nav brand. My next child node is my image, right? That's what's happening. But I'm not really getting exactly what I'm looking for, am I? I want to try and get this image, source name, blah, 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 right? If I really want that, though, I could probably search for it just by tag name. I want to get the first tag name that has an image. I can do that too, right? So going back to my app, I can say my brand image. Instead of doing this whole long thing, I can say, well, instead of query selector, I can also choose dot get element by tag name, and then put inside their image. And this will be the elements. I'm getting multiple elements. I need to choose the first element, which would be this one. And that's the first element that matches the image tag, right? Now, if I do this, if I go back and press app, I'm getting something totally different. I'm getting an image. It's not text anymore. And you can see now that this is the image that I wanted, right? See that? I made this up. Brand image is like my name. I can make whatever name I want. I can call it gobbledygook, right? Whatever. By assigning it in JavaScript, this is the lesson. I'm creating my property immediately if it's an object, which in this case, I've made it an object. App is an object. Okay, that's what I'm saying. And anything that I attach to app, any property that I attach to the app object will be visible outside of my app because I've returned it here. If I don't do this part, it'll be internal and private inside of here. Never will come out, right? This part right here, this last part returns this part. That's what's happening, okay? That's what at least that's how I want you to think about it for now. Are we good? All right, so why did I show you this? I didn't mean to confuse you, but what if I have this other stuff and people said, hey man, there's a lot of stuff here. About click, and I got my home content, and I've got my about content, and I want to split all this up into different files, right? But I want to use one control file, one JavaScript file to access other files. How do I do that? Because in C# and in other languages, we kind of do that, right? We have our main, and then we have a bunch of stuff outside of main, right? So what if, take one step further, right? I want to create my home content. I want to move this whole function, this home content function. I want to move it into something, into a namespace. Hear me out. A namespace that I call content. All right? So I have created a new namespace, a new container, right? New container that I want to call content. All my content is going to be in this container. Let's just say, right? How do I format this thing, first of all, and how do I attach it? So there's two parts. When I make a new namespace, I want you to think about it as a module. Make a new module. I want to split my JavaScript across different files, right? One of the main ways to do it is to compartmentalize it inside of a container called a module or namespace, okay? So a module or namespace needs its own file. So let's first, we create a new file. So this is step one. Create a new file. And we're going to call this home content. we'll call this actually home.js. How about that? Home.js to make it easy. My home.js has nothing inside of it right now, but we want to make it part of this content collection, this content module, right? Content module. So I say something like this, let content, right? I create my content module, this is my object, and then I make my iffy, pass in content, right? Have my curly braces outside and the other ones over here. So it's auto referencing like we normally do, and then we'll return it out, or saying that, hey, we're returning content, whatever that is, or an object, whichever makes sense. Okay, that's what it does. This or syntax says it's one, return one or the other. We don't know which one it is, but right now it's undefined, right? Because we haven't really done anything with it. But if I go over here, it says, hey, this one has an any, right? So it's going to return right now an object. That's what it's doing. This or syntax says assign one or the other, return one or the other, whether content by itself or content as an object. Okay? Don't worry about what this is right now. Now, inside my content, I want to move over my object. So right now, my home content, let me just copy it for now. Okay? Copy it. I move this over to my new module. There's my function by itself. And it's nice and easy to see because you guys are complaining. It's too cluttered, right? My JavaScript's too much inside my JavaScript file. But now this is easy to see what this is, right? I mean, it's just one function, right, that I got in here, right? And it says my home content is this function. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that my content has a reference to my home content function. So what do? Down at the bottom, I say content dot home content. By the way, you can call it content.home. Let's do that. I'm renaming it. Content.home is equal to home content. What am I doing here? I'm returning a reference to the function home content. And it's being passed back out from this content object, back out, and into the buffer that is my index.html. Okay? That's step 2. So step 1, I created a file. Step 2, I did this funky stuff, the syntax. And step 3, in my index.html, somewhere at the bottom, I need to include another file above my app.js because it has to be before in this particular case because I'm splitting across different files, right? Here's my own files, my own libraries. So I'm going to kind of go do a script, source, and then slash scripts. And then notice that there's another one, home.js, right? And what this home.js is, this has to be included before app.js because if I don't include it, then my function will never appear, ever. Right? It has to come before. Order is important in this case. Just like it's important here. jQuery must appear before Bootstrap because then Bootstrap won't know about jQuery, right? So home must appear before app because then, otherwise app won't know about home, right? There is no hoisting here, okay? Because I'm splitting across different files, I must put them in the order that I declare them. Okay? So this is step 3. And I can actually put here's my JavaScript section, yeah. But what if I really do some other renaming? I can say something like, this is third-party libraries. That's what these are, right? And this is my app scripts. That's what these are. App scripts. Okay? So third-party libraries, app scripts. Yeah? All right, we have to test it. That's nice, Tom. You're going to say that's nice. It works, right? But in my app.js, I still have this. Let's comment it out. So just to keep it the same, we're just going to go one of these, comment it out. So now we're not using the one that's inside my app. We want to use the one that's inside my home, right? But we can't access my home by using home content. We need to use content.home, right? Because content.home refers to the home content function, right? So whenever I access home content, I need to change that to content.home. So going back inside here, right, where we do our switching, inside my start, I said home content. We're just going to comment this out. What we want to say is content dot home. If it works, we'll access my content home right here. But we can't do it this way. We need to do it this way, right? Because content home is actually a function we want to access, right? If content home was something else, we could do it that way. That's just a reference. But this actually tells me to execute the home function that exists in this home file that we have made an alias. This is an alias, a reference to, right? That's all we're doing here. And if we go back, and again, I just want to make sure that you guys are good here. I'll explain this one more time in a second, right? Let's test it and see if it works, right? Well, here's home content. Guess what? It's there. If it wasn't there, then my home wouldn't appear, right? About's still the same, and contact's still the same. And if I go back to home, it's good. Why?
How do you refer it inside app.js?
Well, one thing that happened is says something went wrong with switching. You notice we kind of threw that error, right? Something went wrong with switching is on line 152, right? Because I did a console.log, right? And down in here I said something catch, console warn, something went wrong with switching pages, right? Because what I'm saying is, here's my home, here's my about, here's contact, and I went to this. And then it said something went wrong with switching, right? Because somehow I didn't go, but it looks okay to me. What triggered that event, right? This event shouldn't have a problem, but it does. Somehow we're getting to line 152 because inside of here we're doing a try catch. We're saying, hey, try and switch the title. Try and switch the title as a string, right? And the title is this document.title. I'm reading my document title, right? And then when I get to here, somehow I have a problem. But if I was to, it's still working because so what's actually happening is if I look at my source, let's take a look at my sources. So sources, so far we've been looking at the console. Last week we looked at a little bit of elements inside the browser. There's also something called sources we talked about. In sources, you can see that there's this warning, something went wrong, right? Console.warn, because we actually made it down here, right? Console.warn. And you look at the scripts actually show two scripts, home.js and app.js, right? So the scripts are, this is the latest version of my code that my little local server is hitting. It's just displaying this stuff. Are we good? Okay. But my problem is two things. Right? One, I don't know what the heck this home thing is. If I kind of hover over it, home doesn't tell me anything. Right? Current home, content home, I don't even know where content came from. They're going to go, wait, where the hell did content come from? What? And if you search through this code, you'll be like, scratch your head. Content? What's content? Where'd that come from? Right? Because nothing is listed here anywhere in my code. If I was going to search it, if I could do a control F, right, and say content, the only place that I'm going to see content is here. And if I say content.home, the only place that's going to be is right here. This is how I search, control F, right, to search. Okay. So what the heck? Where did this come from? And it doesn't even tell me anything. It doesn't say a damn thing, right? Because we don't get any code hinting. We don't get any code hinting about this. And that's a disadvantage, right? Because we're not getting anything right now back from JavaScript telling us that this is the case. If I want to, I can try and kind of do some comments. By the way, one of the best ways to comment and create this commenting style, if you will, is you can install another little extension called document this. This is inside of, I recommend this one. If I go document this, right? So document this is the extension that I've installed already in my Visual Studio Code. And what this does is it allows you to quickly document your classes and objects later on, which we'll get to. But one thing it'll allow you to do immediately when you add this extension is if I go to my home content and if I type the following, if I type / I guess she figured it out, / star, right? And if you notice, if I go /***, it gives me this syntax that I can go document this, and all of a sudden it gives me this. And I can say something like this method or this function, well, it's not really a method, this function displays the home content. That's what I'm just documenting this function. Now, wouldn't it be nice if this somehow came over here in my app, and if I hover over it, it would tell me what it is, but it doesn't. It's nice. It'd be nice. Sometimes what we have to do, and by the way, some browsers, some IDEs, if you will allow you to do this. I'm just gonna kind of X out of here. I'm gonna restart my Visual Studio Code for a second, and just to show you what I'm doing in a second, you'll see. So I want to get code hinting, but I'm not getting it, and you know, it's normal not to get it because JavaScript doesn't give you anything. So again, if I go back to my app.js, and if I hover over home, right, I get any. I don't get undefined. It's any, because it doesn't know what it is, so it's assuming that it exists. That's what JavaScript does. It assumes that it exists.
It's because of attention.
Same thing with jQuery, right? I want to access jQuery, and jQuery, by the way, for those of you who don't know or who know, I want to access jQuery. jQuery works like this: $, you know, $, something, and then I can do a jQuery, right? And that's how jQuery works. Now I'm getting code hinting from jQuery for a couple reasons. One, jQuery comes with its own, right? But you can install code hinting for jQuery and for other libraries by using something called @types. Okay, so this is all new learning for you guys, so please bear with me. So I want to get code hinting for jQuery and Bootstrap. That means I want to tap into jQuery's library somehow. We're not going to do that today. But let's suppose I wanted to get all the code hinting I wanted for a library that's online that I downloaded. A lot of them are already in NPM. I can do something like this: npm install @types. That's how you start off. And then jQuery --save -dev. And what this is going to do, it's going to go out to the World Wide Web, grab the type definition file for jQuery to give us code hinting inside of Visual Studio Code, and it's going to install it in our code. So I'm going to kind of enter that. It's going to go out, grab jQuery, and it's going to say a couple things. It's going to say, jQuery Bootstrap requires popper.js, and actually I've left that alone for a long time. I left this alone because we didn't install popper.js. It's a missing, requirement for Bootstrap to function properly. We just missed it over the whole time. But when I did this, it says, hey, guess what? Bootstrap needs jQuery, needs needs popper.js. Let's install it because we're missing that requirement. So npm install popper.js --save. And it's going to grab popper.js and install it. Done. Okay. It also tells me that I'm getting a warning that my package.json does not have a description element. So here's my package.json. And notice that I don't have, my description is empty, right? Doesn't have any my description in here at all. So I'll put in the demo for, demo project for COMP125. That's what it's giving me. This just gave me an error. It's not really an error. It's a warning for this thing. So I've installed inside of node modules now, if you notice, because I did this thing here, npm install @types jQuery. What it does, it went out and grabbed jQuery's type definition library and installed it in here, inside this folder. Okay? Hear me out. Hear me out. There's a reason for this thing that I'm telling you. And by the way, I have a really other underlying reason for doing all this stuff, which is going to hit us 5 weeks from now. And you're like, 5 weeks from now? Why are we doing it now? So if I don't do it now, 5 weeks from now, it'll be too late. And you'll be like, oh my God, I got other exams going on. I can't think about this, Tom. Thank you very much. I don't care. Right? But now if I give it to you, you're going to be like, okay, cool. Maybe I can use this. So let's go back in here. Oops, I mess up. Let me go back in here and clear the screen. And now I'm going to do the same thing. npm install. Let's say I wanted to do some kind of funky JavaScript with Bootstrap. I want to use the Bootstrap library. I can. I'm not going to. But let's suppose I wanted to. I can do @types / and then Bootstrap, right? --save -dev. By the way, -save -dev means it's a development dependency, not a project dependency. Because I don't need this, my Bootstrap type. I don't really care. If I didn't have code hinting in my Visual Studio Code, who cares? My project will still run, right? That's why it's a development dependency. That's the -dev, not a project dependency. And if you notice in my NPM, it tells you that. There's dependencies and development dependencies. Development dependency means that, well, it's nice to have, but if I don't have it, my project's still going to run, still going to work. Okay, it's just different ways of kind of monitoring dependencies here. Okay, cool. Well, what the heck does this do, right? Well, like I said, inside my app.js, anywhere now, I'm going to get better code hinting for Bootstrap, for jQuery than I ever did before. So if I put in my $, dot, and now look at the right. I get all kinds of stuff. Here's Ajax, and if I put dot like this, I'm going to get all kinds of stuff about jQuery that I would never get before. And it comes from this file that's inside node modules, inside add types, inside jQuery, inside index.d.ts, right? That makes sense? That's where it comes from. This is all the definitions for jQuery. It's actually written in a special language, which I will talk about later. But it actually gives you all the definitions here, see? All the definitions and some code hinting. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do the same thing for our files? We can. Now let's do it. This is advanced. You're not going to get this in any other class, only mine. And some people will say, but Tom, do we really need this stuff? When you're programming a big application, when you're doing a little application, like a little piddly application we're doing right now, our little baby application that we're making, nah, you can probably get away without it. But what if you have multiple classes and objects split across multiple files, and you want to get code hinting, or maybe you're passing it off to my friend, my developer who I'm working with. He doesn't know what I wrote. I want to give him some hints about what I'm doing in my class, so it helps, right? So what I can do is inside my @types, I have this folder called jQuery, right? But I can put in, and I also, by the way, have this other folder called Bootstrap. Now, wouldn't it be nice if I had another folder called like app? So let's do that. Inside my @types, I'm going to make a new folder called app. And inside my folder .app, I'm going to make this new. We're missing this index.d.ts. So let's make that in there. So we'll put a new file. So new file, index.d.ts. All right, empty file, right? And now we need to do a couple things. If you follow the example inside of Bootstrap, it's actually quite easy. If you go to the @types Bootstrap file in my index.d.ts, it says this. It says some kind of namespace that's called Bootstrap. I can do that. And then I want to use the export keyword for anything that I want to export. That's what I want to do. Well, we're only exporting one thing, function. My function called home content. All right? I know, lots of stuff for yes. I'm so sorry. I know, I could stop. I won't tell you anymore if you don't want, but then that's just going to hurt you later on. Let's go back to, first of all, let's go to my home.js and do a couple changes. One, instead of my home content being like this, let's make my home content like how it should be, like this. Okay, that's how it really should be. Because I'm kind of saying whatever this is, I want to kind of export. And let me just fix it inside my app.js. Instead of here being home content or home, it's going to be home content. Just to be the same, so you guys understand what this is. I'm accessing the home content function from my content namespace. My content namespace. Okay? I've created my content namespace up here. This is my content namespace. And I'm attaching my home content function to the content namespace right here. The content namespace. Okay, that's what we have. We're creating a namespace or another container that's going to contain my content function. Namespace, a container, or module. Think of it like that. Okay, for now. All right, so that's cool. How do I define that? So if I'm going to define my stuff in my index.d.ts, I need to declare. There's a new statement called declare. And it's going to be a type namespace. All right, this is new stuff. So modern TypeScript, right, that we're using. And in here, what we're going to call this namespace is content, right? Here's my content namespace. Inside my content namespace, I'm exporting my function and I only use my function header, which is home content. Yeah, that's all it is. That's what I'm doing here. And inside my home, which is this, I'm going to get rid of all this stuff because I don't care about that. Right? I want to put my comments inside of my hinting file in here, right? So I can do that by going / document this, which is going to say this function displays the content for the home page, right? Notice it says at export, right? We'll talk about that later on. All right, so that's all this is, and I just put this, that's all I've put in here. So I declare a statement that says namespace, and namespace is content, and I have a export statement that and the name of my function, but no details, just my declaration of my function header. That's all I'm doing here, okay? And if you hover over it, now look what I get. It says this function displays the content from the home page. Actually, a function itself tells me that. Now, if I'm right, and if I did things correctly, let me just close these down. Sometimes you need to close all this stuff down for a second because it's the first time you're using it. If I go to my app.js, and if I hover over it now, we get this. Code hinting, my friends. Custom code hinting that I made, right?
What's the meaning of this tedious buttons?
TypeScript. Okay, we're not going to use TypeScript. We're using JavaScript, but we're using TypeScript to give us code hinting for the rest of my document. So what it's doing is it's giving me in Visual Studio Code a way of detecting the type and stuff that I need for my custom function. I can put it in there too, right? So if I make another function, as long as I put it as part of the same namespace, and inside my index.t.ts file, inside here, inside my index.t.ts file, I can name another one that's in here. For example, about content. And here's one more advantage. If I go down to here, and if I say content dot, if I go down to another line, if I can try and do it again, I can say content. Notice I get these little curly braces. That means object. Content dot, and I get something that comes up. It tells me, hey, look, there's this home content thing you've defined, right? Now, there's a danger to this. The danger is, what if I define my code hinting, but there's actually nothing? Like I didn't attach a file. It still works. It'll still give me all the code hinting I want, but it's useless, right? So the best practice is when you create code hinting, this lib file, the d.ts file is a library file. It tells me, hey, I'm adding something new to my library. That's what I'm doing. Guys, this is modern JS, okay? Do I need it? No. I don't need this to develop. I can develop with vanilla JS. I'm not getting any help. Somehow I'll remember. I'm going to split off a couple of files. Maybe I can look at the file and figure it out. But for me, I always try and save time, right? That's what this whole thing is, time saving, and it's a way of me getting an idea of what the heck I'm getting from my file. Content is my namespace. Home content is the function that I defined inside my namespace. Here's my home content file. That's my function. That's inside of my namespace content that I've kind of let out this way, right? Now I could put all of my content stuff in here, but I can take it one further. As long as I defined it once, my content, right? Content now exists inside my browser namespace, which means, first of all, let's see if it all worked or if I messed up. Does it even work? I mean, I don't know. What did I do here? Running my PowerShell, we're still good, but I don't have light server going, so I'll say light server, right? So let's try this out. And it looks good, right? Let's see if I'm getting any errors. Inspect inside my console. I'm still getting this funky thing here, but I mean, it works. Look, I'm going to my about page. I'm going to my contact page. All this stuff is working, and I'm switching it right here. No problem. Contact, right? So what the heck happened? I'm getting contact here, and if I go back to home, let's go back to home. I got my title as home, and I got this funky thing going on. How come here but nowhere else? Let's think about this for a second. All right. Well, I want to do the same thing with my about contact and contact content. I want to split those up into different files too to make them easier to work with, right? Because otherwise, I got to swim through this whole thing, right? look through all this stuff, right? And I got all this other stuff here. Look at my about button click, my about button over, my about button out. All that stuff can be moved to my about content in my other namespace. I can move all this into my another file, and it would make my main file very thin. My start would have like that to start, and the rest would be coming from the other ones, which is something that we're used to as developers, right? We want to move our files off into other files to make it easier to kind of understand and to kind of use, right? It does make our application a little fatter though, right? But only because I have extra files. I've got to do more file access, but it's better for us. And you'll see that later on when you develop in JavaScript. So I don't need this anymore. I know this isn't, I don't need this anymore. I'm going to just erase it. I don't need this thing. I just kept keeping it there just in case. I also got this return pi thing. Where do I use all this return pi stuff? All these things are kind of required in my about content page, right? So I'm going to kind of grab, by the way, notice that there's these little lines here. If I go up here, I can kind of do one of these, right? So I need this. I don't care about content because there's nothing in there right now. But all this, I need this, this, all this is about stuff, right? And they're all kind of by themselves, right? So I want to grab all of this stuff right here. And I know it's going to work. I want to cut it. I'm going to be bold now. I'm going to cut it, right? So now there's none of that in there. I'm going to create a new app, new file. So this is step one. Step one, when you're making a module, make a file. So new file. I'm going to call this about.js, right? Step two, create the syntax you need for the module. Now we already have the content. I don't have to do that again. I have to declare let content because I already have that. Otherwise you'll get an error. But I do need this. I need my IFE. I need to pass in content because I already have content because I'm going to make it part of the same namespace, right? And then I need these brackets. And at the end, I need these brackets where I return content or content as an object. Okay, I need that syntax. Once I have that, and I can kind of put all my content I just copied or cut in here, right? Okay, for all of this to work, now I got to think about private and public. Do I need about button click in my main method? No. About button click, about button over, about button out, return pi should all be private functions that only my about content needs. None of the other ones care about it because my home and my other ones don't care about those functions at all. I only care about those functions, right, when I'm accessing the about page. Okay? So that's number one. So these are all private. So I don't have to return them. The only one I have to return is this one. This one will access these ones inside of its own little area, right? So down at the bottom, when I return stuff, here's my properties, right? I want to say that content.about content is equal to about content. That's all I'm returning. I'm not returning anything else because this is going to be my public function, and these are going to be my private functions that I don't care about. I don't want anyone to know about this. This is encapsulated, going with the object-oriented encapsulation protocol, right? Inside of this namespace, right? So that means that these ones exist and they're accessible to about content because they're in the same closure, right? They're in the same closure, the same scope, right? But they're not available outside of this scope. Only about content is available because I'm attaching it at the bottom, right? Okay, so that's step two. Step one, make a file. Step two, copy stuff into the file, make your module syntax. Step three, I need to do the next part, which is attach it to my index.html because it needs to exist. Now, curious, does my home need to know about? No, not really. Does my app need to know about? Yes. So it must come before app, but it could come before or after home. It doesn't matter. So I need to put this in here like this. So script, source, scripts, and then about. Okay, cool. So that takes care of functionality-wise, it's going to function, right? But now I got to add to my types. So in my types, in my app, if I look at my index.d.ts, I have another one, which is export function, right? And instead of home content, it's called about contents, right? So I'm kind of declaring it, and I'm saying that this one, right? I'll do an add export too. I forgot to do that. This one, although it's not really that important. In fact, I can just, if you don't want this, it doesn't really do anything in our case. You can, this is just a signal that you can add other things. This function displays the content for the about page. What I want. By the way, you can put any other comments you want in there. You just don't have to put that. You can break it over multiple lines. You could add other things. But for now, this is what this does, right? So that's what's in here. And if I go to my app and down in here, right, there is no about content anymore. However, there is content dot about content. Look, right there. And it tells me it's not this because this is for the home, but this is for the about page, right? And I know that that's going to work. So now I've said that I'm getting my about content from my about file, right? About.js, which is inside of my content namespace. Let's see if it worked. Nice talking, Tom, but let's see if it actually works. So I go here, and if I go to about, and then we're something, hey, look, it's still giving me some funky error, right? If I go back to home, it's also giving me an error. It says uncomp reference. It says content is not defined, right? Content. Did I kind of do something here somewhere? Did I? Content. Yeah, that would be bad, right? Somehow it still worked. Kind of understood what I wanted, but yeah, this is the problem. All right, so we still got this funky error. Something went wrong. We got to figure this out, right? And but this is home works, and so does about. About also works. But look at this. What happened down here? We asked it to do something, and it didn't do it. Notice there's something missing down here. Why? Huh? Because, hey, look, it said that it was supposed to do stuff, right? And I said, my favorite things lists. And I did that on my about. And it says document.GetElementByID, my favorite things, right? And it says, hey, let my associative array, I made my array, my associative array, and it's asking for stuff, right? It's asking for stuff to happen. And then I go through this and I'm like, okay, so here's let paragraph is equal to paragraph, right? Okay, so this is happening already. But curious, does about content, is there anything inside paragraph right now? So when I call about content, right? Let's look at the app.js for a second. So app.js triggers, right? I mean, this is something you have to understand how this works, right? So let's see how it goes. So I'm saying my window add event listener start, right? So start happens, and then I'm doing this kind of stuff, app.document title and tag name or whatever. We don't need this anymore because that was just for our example, right? But I'm calling start. So this is my add event listener start. Start goes here when it's finished loading, right? And this app.js finishes. It finishes running when my window starts, when my BOM is done. When my window, my document stops, this is running. This is running now, right? So now I do this try catch. And I say, okay, switch title. Switch title, right? So what's my document title? It says right here, document title is equal to title. I put my switch case in here, and then I go, okay, cool. So if in case my COMP125 is the title, then do so on. In case my COMP125 about is the title, then do this. Okay. So I got my title, and I'm going to put my about content. I hit this about content, which looks nice. But what's really happening is this. This is already in my content. This about content already exists. It's inside my it's inside my document. I've already loaded it. This is already preloaded, this document, right? Because I've loaded it in order, right? So if I go to my index.html, First, I ordered my home, then I added my about, and now I'm in my app.js, right? So my app.js knows about and this one because these have been loaded earlier because of what's happening here. If I look through my index.html, right? My index.html loads every single one of these objects one by one. Okay, that's why I don't know why we're getting an extra one of these. One by one, it goes through each of these things one by one. And finally, when this is all done, it comes down to this part here. And it goes, okay, cool, let's load this one, let's load this one, and then let's load this one in order. And so my document actually doesn't look like this. What it looks like is this. My script element, home, loads first, it's on the top. Then there's an about, and then there's this app.js down here. So these two are already loaded. But what's happening is that in my about page, it's accessing a document that doesn't exist. It's never existed yet. It's trying to get to that document.title, right? So my about.js, I'm saying, hey, let my paragraph get equal to my paragraph, right? And here's my funky number, return pi. Here it is, my funky number, return pi. Console log, let's see if we get this part. Does my about content even trigger? Let's look at this, right? Does it even go to my about content? Because if it didn't, then we should get my console log that says this. Does it do this part? Let's see. Where is it? So somehow my about content is not going. Why? About content is a function, and I come down here, right, as an example, and content.about content is equal to about content. It's returning the content out, and I do the same thing with my app.js. Look, here's my app.js, and my home.js. My home button does about button, and when I hover over it and click onto it, something should happen, right? And it says my about button.add event listener. My about button.add event listener is in here, but I'm trying to access it in my about.js. Well, I didn't access it. Actually, all of this, these three things should be in the other one. This stuff shouldn't be here. It should be inside my home, right? Because otherwise, my buttons will never work, right? Because look, add event listener, about click, about button, that's right here, okay? That's the first change. So now if I go back to my home, and if I click on my about button, we still get this about button working. This is good. That means that somehow inside my home content, this stuff triggered. And to know this, I can say something like this. Well, I think I know what the error is, but look at my home content. I can say something like console log home content triggered, right? So you know that if I come to this point and I can actually do my console log, then my home content somehow fired, right? And you can see that it does. What about this? Here's my app, my about.js. Here's my about content. Here's my about content. So I'm doing the same thing, right? I'm attaching it. How come it's not triggering? About content triggered. Okay. About. Something's wrong. It's not going there at all. Here's my about content. Here's my about content. Content.about content is equal to this. So I'm adding it on. Right? Here's my app. It says content.about content. That should work if it goes here, but it's not. Why is that? And that's something for tomorrow. Because we're splitting across different files, right? And we want to try and understand what's happening. Why is it not going here? Okay? Something's not working. It's not getting us to this point. And we're going to figure it out tomorrow. Any questions around this? So we talked about namespaces today. This is new. We talked about the document object model and the BOM. We're going to do more of that tomorrow, right? There's going to be a little exercise tomorrow. Kind of be aware that there will be another exercise. And by tomorrow, I should have all your stuff marked. So whatever you have left, if you haven't handed it in, tonight's tonight. Okay? Any questions? Guys, see you tomorrow. Thank you.